Hello, I'm Iya Gozum, and you're watching Rappler Talk. It's been a week since the United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP28, started in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. COP28 features its first ever global stocktake, a process where countries and other stakeholders will evaluate their progress in the attainment of the goals set in the historic 2015 Paris Agreement. But in all these high level talks, why should the youth bother to keep an eye on what's happening at COP28 in Dubai? To help us answer that question, with us today is UNICEF Philippines Youth Delegate, 21-year-old Joshua Villalobos, who is now in Dubai following the negotiations on the global stocktake. Uh, Joshua, how are you?
Hello, Miss Iya. Good morning from Dubai. I'm so happy to be back, to be interviewed again by Rappler. Um, well, pang tapos na ang first week ng COP. Ngayon ay December 7, naka-rest day ang buong COP dahil kakatapos lang ng first week at next week ay bukas ay magsisimula ang second week ng COP.
All right. So, how's the first few days in Dubai at COP28? Can you describe to us the climate, the colors, what's happening? How's your experience following the negotiations at COP?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is my first COP, so I actually cannot compare it to the other. So, and well, during this interview, I will not very much focus on the policy side and all the technical because I think there's much more. Um, may mas mga competent na tao na mas makasagot doon, particularly in the Philippines, but I will try my best. Well, they said this is the biggest COP ever. The
Yeah.
latest number that we have is 107,000 registrants, which is 3 times bigger than the COP27 in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt last year, which was around 35. So ngayon napakalaki. So how do you even manage that much of a number of delegates? So well,
Yeah.
it's usual in the morning to have very long queues. So, bago ka makapasok sa security and even at the security and at the entrance. So, maraming pila. And then, it's also so nice that the COP delegate, that the host country has given us all of the COP delegates has a metro card. So, all of us has
Yeah.
actually have an opportunity to travel sustainably. Well, on average, parang lahat ng delegates would need to travel an hour to get to the COP venue unless you're very near. Well, mga 30 minutes or so on and so forth. But you know, that's a daily thing that you do here at COP. And then the venue is also so big. Um,
Mhm.
merong blue zone at merong green zone. So yung blue zone ay kung saan nangyayari ang negotiations. That's also where most of the side events and the pavilions are there also in the blue zone. But there's also the green zone. By the way, the blue zone is only open for COP28 delegates. So kung meron kang accreditation at saka meron kang badge from the UNFCCC or the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, pwede kang makapasok sa blue zone. Pero if you're a general public at gusto mo pa ding makisama sa proseso ng COP at tumingin-tingin, no? At saka ma-experience yung mga iba't ibang mga pavilions, mga booths, mga initiatives, mga innovations, you can also go to the green zone, which is a much bigger space. Napakarami ding mga
Right.
innovations na andon, mga pavilions, at saka mga side events na nangyayari, mga talks and presentations. So, so far, yun yung mga pangyayari. Yun, napakaraming tao at always maraming lakaran. So, I think on average ay 20,000 steps kami dito every day.
Right. That should keep you healthy.
Yes.
Taking 20,000 steps a day. But generally, COP is always this annual coming together of environmental advocates from all around the world. And you've been an active climate, you've been really active in the field, no, for many years already. How was it like meeting fellow young activists from the Philippines, from the other countries?
Yes, napakagandang napakagandang feeling. And I think out of the 100,000, kung hindi ako nagkakamali, ay mga 20,000 doon ay kabataan. So there's really a lot of young people, no, from youth organizations, from grassroots organizations, indigenous peoples, and even academics, no? Merong mga andito coming from their university. So maraming mga universities na mga delegates din. Well, dito sa Pilipinas, marami din kaming mga kabataan na andito, and I'm so happy to see that. And we usually gather in every CSO, Philippine CSO coordination meetings, kung saan nagkikita-kita kami. Nung unang Philippine CSO coordination meeting ay halos 70% ay youth siguro, kung hindi ako nagkakamali. Napakaraming kabataan na nandito, and the energy is amazing, and also it makes you proud to see that a lot of Filipino youth advocates are being recognized not only by the formal big institutions, but also by different groups for the work that we're doing in the Philippines.
So that's nice hearing that a lot of young climate activists are present at COP. Ano yung mga nakikita mo na main themes or calls na bitbit ngayon ng kabataan sa Dubai?
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of young people here at COP28, and I think not only at COP, palaging issue na binibitbit ng mga kabataan yung issue on participation and inclusion in decision making, no? Palagi yan na daing na most of us are not included in the decision making process, particularly even in the development nung kung ano ang magiging positions ng mga country delegations. However, on the brighter side also, I met a lot of youth negotiators. Ibig sabihin ay mga kabataan din sila sa kanilang mga bansa, at kasama sila ng kanilang mga party delegations na kanilang gobyerno para so hindi lang sila nakikisama sa decision making, but they're actually here to negotiate, no? Because thanks to UNICEF, I was part of this Young Negotiators Academy, which is a program at training with youth negotiators from all around the world. And palagi nagiging issue ang inclusion. So I think we're seeing a growth naman din at recognition ng hindi lamang ng mga organizations, but most importantly, the governments and the parties that are here recognizing the role of young people. But secondly, isa sa pinakamatunog na issue ay yung pag-push ng mga kabataan ng phase out ng fossil fuels. No, kasi alam naman natin na ang napakalaking emissions na nandito ngayon sa ating atmosphere ay dahil sa fossil fuel industry. At kung gusto nating i-cut down ng emissions na yon, ay planuhin na natin ng maayos at makatarungang phase out ng fossil fuel. Pag sinabi namang phase out ay hindi naman natin sinasabi na isara natin lahat ng coal plant at lahat ng oil and gas plants bukas. Ang ibig natin sabihin pag nananawagan tayo ng fossil fuel phase out ay mag-agree tayo na paplanuhin natin ang maayos at makatarungan. Ibig sabihin ay merong mga safeguards and mechanisms in place to ensure that it is a just and equitable transition. Walang manggagawang mawawala ng trabaho at mamiminimise yung mga cost of the transition. And thirdly, yung issue also of conflict of interest, I'm seeing that because I'm also part of YONGO, which is the official children and youth constituency sa UNFCCC process. Yung issue ng conflict of interest, dahil nga number one, alam naman natin na ang COP presidency, si Dr. Al-Jabir ay isang CEO ng oil company.
Yeah.
At tapos pangalawa ay napakaraming delegation ng oil and gas companies sa COP28. So isang malaking usapin ang issue ng transparency and conflict of interest and transparency in the entire COP process. And I think lastly also, particularly on UNICEF side, is also the recognition of how children and young people are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. But isa din sa gustong ilabas na narrative is that for the longest time, young people has always been at the hindi naman in the immediate past few years pala, particularly after in 2018 nung nagsimulang sumikat si Greta Thunberg at ang movement na Fridays for Future and the entire youth movement for climate action. Marami ng attention na nabibigay to young people, and children has always been part of that. Naging parte ang mga bata sa pag-push ng agenda ng climate action. But we're also looking at a climate policy na napapabayaan din ang children. So, mas well, pumapasok na ang inclusion ng youth, which is good, but the recognition of how children are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis is not still well being recognized, no? Particularly in COP decision text. Sinasabi nga na in the past 27 COPs, wala pang any recognition in any of the decision text na pagkilala of how disproportionately affected ang mga bata at kabataan sa impacts ng climate change.
All right. Speaking of, recently the UNICEF released this report entitled "The Climate Change Child." Can you take us through the salient points of that report, and how do you see this report in context of Filipino youth and children who are battered by natural disasters every year?
Mm-hmm. Gusto ko yung term na battered by natural disasters kasi tama talaga eh. Yung mga kabataan at mga batang Pilipino ay pinalaki ng bagyo. Inong isang interview nga sa akin sa doon sa COP venue ay tinanong ako, imagine a planet na na-solve na natin ang climate change. And for me, it's difficult to imagine because I grew up in an era of climate change. Lumaki ako na normal ang bagyo sa Pilipinas, 'di ba? Parang hindi normal pag hindi bumabagyo. So, lumakit na yung mga bata at kabataan ay bugbog sa impacts ng climate crisis. At yung report ng UNICEF ay nagpapatunay dyan, no? At I think it's just, yung report ay pagsulat lang ng kung ano na ang mga ini-experience ng mga bata at kabataan. So, yung isang salient point ay bago pa man ipanganak ang mga bata ay impacted na sila ng climate crisis. No, dahil ang mga nanay nila ay nagiging impacted, so sila din ay nagiging impacted na ng climate crisis. At yung title nga ng report is The Climate Change Child. So binabago ng krisis sa klima ang mga kabataan natin ngayon. So mula conception, binubuo pa lang sila sa womb hanggang ipanganak sila, hanggang lumaki, ay impacted ng climate crisis. No, meron yung mga research na naglilink ng increased global temperature or ang pag-init ng mundo sa paglala or sa pangit ng quality at pagbaba ng quantity ng breast milk. So kahit doon ay apektado na ang mga kabataan at in terms also of health, of course, very vulnerable ang mga children. And I think this is also very easy to understand na in times of any disaster or any extreme weather events, palaging mga bata ang napuput into very vulnerable situations. Affected ang education, affected ang health, affected ang nutrition, and almost every aspects of their lives. And they are not little adults. Hindi sila, at least kagaya ko, na alam na kung ano ang gagawin or meron na kaya nang maghanap ng solutions on that circumstances. For example, hindi kasi alam naman nating bata sila. So, I hope that these realities will call upon the conscience of the leaders all around the world to listen. And, palaging sinasabi na let's do it for our children, let's do it for the next generation. But I hope they will really truly listen to it this time.
So, Joshua, in light of this report, what are some low-hanging fruits that UNICEF has identified, at least na pwedeng magawa ngayon na nandyan kayo sa COP in Dubai?
Yes. Isa sa mga number one na pinupush ngayon ng UNICEF dito sa COP28 ay ang expert dialogue on how children are disproportionately impacted on the climate crisis. So, sa proseso ng COP, kailangan lang maipasok ang one sentence na yan, na requesting the chair of the subsidiary body of implementation to conduct an expert dialogue sa June. Pero medyo ginagapang pa din, no? Even though may mga support na from country. So ang expert dialogue ay isang usapan, no, ng mga eksperto at saka isang diskusyon kung paano disproportionately impacted ang mga bata. At this report, this dialogue is not only an activity, but this will hopefully produce a report that can be used for succeeding COPs, such as COP29 and COP30, as a reference for decision makers to decide on how to handle issues and impacts of climate change specific to children. So napakadaling abutin yon. And recently, we have gathered support, no, from different parties and delegations. So, for example, it was raised by Switzerland and then sinuport ng Norway, ng Mexico, etc. And their groupings, party groupings, kasi yung dito sa COP ay hindi naman lahat ay nagsasalita, lahat ng countries, kasi 190 plus din yan. So pag nagsalita silang lahat, matagal. So most of the time, meron silang mga country groupings. So, halimbawa, yung G77 plus China, kung saan member ang Pilipinas, yung LMDC
Yeah.
or developing countries, umbrella group, etc., etc. So, meron ng mga support from those groups, and we hope to see it on the decision text na lalabas for the GST particularly, or yung global stocktake, as one of the ways forward. Kasi isa din yun, no, sa mga nakita na, for example, yung mga NDCs or yung mga nationally determined contributions na sinubmit ng mga bansa, napakarami ang hindi child-sensitive or walang recognition ng mga kabataan at bata in their circumstances. So halimbawa yung NDC ng Pilipinas din, no, ay mayroong rating ng 0 to 4, at may mga categories kung how child-sensitive is our NDCs, and the Philippines is unfortunately in the lowest category, meaning hindi child-sensitive. But, natapos na ang first global stocktake. So, merong opportunity for countries right now to course correct. Yung hindi pag-include ng mga bata at kabataan in the past NDC submissions, in the past plans, ngayon meron silang opportunity na baguhin yon in the future, and the inclusion of children and youth in decision text will hopefully guide decision makers and governments around the world to ensure that their next submissions of their contributions and their plans is reflective also of the unique circumstances of children and young people all around the world.
Right. So, Joshua, I'm curious because you mentioned earlier that you've been talking to some parties now regarding this agenda on the inclusion of children and youth in the negotiations. But have you talked to the Philippine delegation, and ano yung response nila regarding this agenda of inclusion?
Well, yung proposal talaga ng UNICEF, at so that's where I am focusing on also, is yung expert dialogue on how children are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. I sent it to one of the commissioners of the Climate Change Commission, and she acknowledged it and sent it to their negotiators. But for the GST, for example, which is the track I am following, the lead negotiator for G77 in China is from the Philippines.
Right.
Yes,
Listen to you,
and
right?
yes. And unfortunately, hindi pa natin naririnig yung either hindi siya pinopropose ng G77 or hindi siya sinusupport kapag pinopropose siya ng ibang countries. Well, it might be because G77 is it's the biggest grouping. 134 countries ang members niya. So, it's difficult to get consensus, and I'm sure that they're also raising a lot of issues on their end. So, I will forgive them on that. So, kasi mahirap din naman maghanap ng consensus. Alam ko, so 134 countries na yan, lahat silang may agenda na gustong i-push sa G77. So, maybe they don't see this yet as an opportunity, but we really hope that they recognize that this is such a low-hanging fruit that they can do for children. Hindi lang to simple na dialogue, hindi lang to simple na usapan, but this will actually define on how climate policies will be created for the future of children. So sana ay ma-recognize din to ng ating mga negotiators. And so I was talking to one commissioner from the Climate Change Commission and also another member of the Philippine delegation, and they were open to it. They said they receive it, etc., and they will forward it to the negotiators, but no promises yet. So,
Well, we still have a few days, so we'll see if
yes,
that would be put
yes,
on the table.
hopefully.
Right. So, aside from the global stock take, climate finance is the talk of the town at COP. And a recent study, I think UNICEF is also part of this study, saw that in the analysis of the international climate finance, only 2.4% can be classified as supportive of projects that are child responsive. Why do you think it's important that whatever mechanisms or operationalization that parties agreed to that agreed to in climate finance na dapat maging child sensitive and maging child responsive yung mga ganitong klaseng funds.
Yes, I agree na palaging talk of the town ang financing at funds dito sa COP28. At saka isa nga sa major news, no, yung adoption ng decision of loss and damage operationalization noong day one, noong opening ng COP, which is sabi ng mga UN experts, ni Cristiano Figueres, halimbawa, yung dating executive secretary ng UNFCCC is very unlikely because hindi naman normally nangyayari yan. Pero well, it's a welcome development na nakapag-decide ang parties on the operationalization of the loss and damage fund, though many issues are still left to be addressed. But going on to your question, napakahalaga no na child responsive and child sensitive yung mga pondo na nilalabas kasi sayang. Parang kung maglalabas ka din naman ng pera, siguraduhin na nating holistic yung ginagastos natin. Well, I know for many people, including myself, climate finance is a whole different monster to understand, no? Napakahirap niya pang aralin at i-understand, pero yun nga, no, yung napaka-sad na report na kasama din ng UNICEF sa paggawa na 2.4% lang ang child-responsive na climate finance. So we hope that well, that's why it's important. Going back to our first recommendation in the expert dialogue will inform future policies, including financing, on how countries and the COP process in general can be more child sensitive on both the processes, the substance of the decisions, and particularly most importantly also the financing that reaches the ground to ensure na child sensitive to.
Kanina nung nangangamusta ako, kamusta yung first few days mo at COP, you seem really excited. But I see a lot of young climate activists also online, no, na they're jaded by the slow progress of the past conferences. Why do you think it's still important, no, na kahit na mabagal yung progress for climate activist standards, na i-follow pa rin yung mga negotiations na nangyayari sa annual conference na to?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's our role here to ensure that the negotiations are happening fast enough that it can catch up. Well, I recognize that feeling of my fellow youth climate activists that are, some of them do not even recognize the impact of the negotiations anymore. So, may iba sa kanila na parang hindi na naniniwala na kayang maipanalo to ng climate negotiations or kaya tayong gawin significant enough to catch up to the already existing impacts of this emergency. Well, I recognize that, and those are very valid points because ang tagal-tagal ang bagal-bagal yung itong operationalization ng loss and damage, halimbawa na in-announce ng day one, 30 years in the making yon na pinupush ng civil society and ng other least developed countries. So, I totally understand. But also on the flip side, if we all live, kung iiwan natin yung proseso na to, ano yung alternative na process, di ba? And for me, it's really difficult to find out an alternative to it which can have the same impact and the same level of scale of impact. So, napakahalaga na, yung parang meron kang persistence and endurance to stay in this process and to push for government leaders to keep the pressure on para patuloy nilang nafe-feel na maraming nakaantabay at maraming um, naghihintay sa mga gagawin nilang desisyon at maraming nakabantay sa kung ano man ang decision na gagawin nila. So, well, my being excited is probably because this is my first COP, but also, dahil din, meron pa ding part of me na naniniwala sa proseso na merong magandang maiidulot itong process na to. Kasi kung wala, hindi na ako pumunta dito, 'di ba? Kasi sayang yung 2 weeks na nandito ka tapos nandito ako halimbawa tapos hindi naman pala ako naniniwala sa proseso. At very very important also that young people should also monitor the negotiations. Sabi nga nung pag-deliver ng Global Youth Statement, which is a statement of 750,000 children and youth, including thousands from the Philippines, na yung mga kabataan na hindi lang nandito sa COP para umattend ng mga side events, kumuha ng mga free stuff, at umattend sa mga actions, but most of us are really here to follow the negotiations and to ensure that government leaders feel that receive, recognize, and fully integrate our demands in the decision text and pressure them to move fast enough to catch up to the crisis that we're having right now. So, yun nga, no, sa halimbawa, 107,000 participants, palaging problema din in the past few days yung rooms kasi hindi siya big enough to accommodate parties and observers, and most of the time palaging hindi naman pala most of the time, pero may mga instances na parties lang talaga dahil nga maliliit ang rooms for the negotiations. And also a good thing is publicly available naman yung webcast online if you're a delegate, so you can still watch it online, the negotiations. So there are many ways, and there are also, if you cannot understand yet the process, or the negotiations will be taking so long and you have other things to attend to, a lot of groups also provide daily summary, for example, kung ano mga napag-uusapan at saka kung ano yung mga key outcomes ng mga negotiating tracks. And it's difficult for you to follow all of the tracks kasi napakarami. Merong technology, merong finance, merong loss and damage, merong mitigation, may adaptation, may action for climate empowerment, may global stockpick, etc. etc. So, sabi nga nila, kung gusto mo talaga makapag-meaningfully follow ng isang track, ng track ay siguro at most ay 2 na ang kaya mo kasi madaming pangyayari din talaga. At yes.
I'm really glad that you mentioned endurance because it's really the name of the game. And you would know that personally because you've been active in a lot of campaigns even before coming into COP. You've been active in the climate justice environment movement since you're very young, right? And how do you think this experience would inform the way you approach and lead campaigns when you come back here in the Philippines?
Yes, the question is so interesting. So one of the realizations so far while going here at COP, and even before going here, like undergoing the trainings, all the sessions to understand what really are the negotiations, what tracks, etc., is that this is the bird's eye view. So hindi to very much sensitive of the local social and cultural landscape. This is the general agreement. This is the general framework that they are setting in here. And the real battle for contextualized scenarios and outcomes are still really on the ground. But I think it's good to be here to understand that over that general big framework, no, of how leaders agreed to solve this planetary crisis that we're having. And but I think also in the more concrete one, I'm honored to be under the wings of UNICEF negotiations team. So they talk to negotiators and I also learn a lot from that experience. Yung parang how do you lobby international negotiators, and I think you can always apply that. And when working at the local level, and also very important to one of my plans is to really after this COP is to report to young people in the Philippines what happened here, um, what are the things relevant to the Filipino children and youth community that happened here, what decisions were taken up, um, to report to them because I feel responsible na nandito ako at I have that responsibility to report back to them no na ito yung nangyari, ito yung pwede natin gawin, ito yung ways forward. Because recognizing that not everyone can be here and I feel like this is a big privilege and this is a big opportunity to be here. And aside from that, because I've always been a local activist from Negros Occidental, I also plan when I go back in the Philippines in December to report to our networks on what happened here, no? So that we all of the work that we're doing at the local arena are also informed of the international stuff that are happening here at COP28.
All right. Thank you, Joshua, and good luck on the next few days at COP. Again, that was Joshua Villalobos, UNICEF Philippines Youth Delegate, talking to us about the youth's role at COP28. To check out Rappler stories on COP28, visit Rappler.com or our Facebook, X, Instagram, and YouTube pages. I'm Iya Gozum, and this has been Rappler Talk.